"You don't belong at this table. This is a family dinner, and frankly, you're ruining the mood just by sitting there." That's what my son-in-law said to me, in my house, at my dining room table, the one I bought 32 years ago at a furniture store in Dayton, Ohio, with my late wife, Barbara. We'd argued over that table for 20 minutes. She wanted round, I wanted rectangular. We compromised, rectangular top, rounded corners. She always got half of what she wanted, and I always thought that was a fair deal. My son-in-law said that to me while sitting in my chair, the one at the head of that table. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I am not a man who makes scenes. I spent 35 years as a project manager for a civil engineering firm in Columbus. My entire career was built on staying calm when everything around me was falling apart. When contracts fell through, when deadlines collapsed, when subcontractors called me at midnight with problems that couldn't wait until morning. My colleagues used to say I had ice in my veins. My wife said I was just stubborn in a quiet way. She was right. She usually was. When my daughter called me 2 years ago and told me that she and her husband were in financial trouble, I didn't panic. I listened. She told me the restaurant they'd opened together had struggled through the pandemic and never really recovered. They'd burned through their savings. They were 3 months behind on rent for their apartment in Cincinnati. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law because that's what he is, legally, though I use the term loosely, had lost a business partnership that he'd assured everyone was going to make them rich. It hadn't, not even close. My daughter has always been my soft spot. She's my only child. Her mother passed from pancreatic cancer 7 years ago, and after that it was just the two of us. I was 61 when Barbara died. My daughter was 28. We got closer in that grief, the way you sometimes do. She'd call me every Sunday. We'd talk for an hour sometimes. About nothing, mostly. About everything. So when she called and said they needed help, I said yes before she even finished asking. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. That word, temporary. I should have put it in writing. I should have had a lawyer draw up a document with a specific end date, conditions, expectations. I didn't, because she was my daughter, and you don't do that with your daughter. You trust her. You extend the kind of faith that doesn't require paperwork. They moved into my house in March. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville, Ohio, that Barbara and I bought in 1991. I paid off the mortgage in 2009. It's mine, free and clear, deed in my name alone. I want to be clear about that, because it becomes relevant. The first few months were fine, crowded but fine. My son-in-law was job hunting. My daughter was freelancing as a graphic designer. I cooked most nights. We'd eat together and watch television in the evenings. He and I didn't have much to talk about, but we were civil, polite. 2 people sharing space and making the best of it. Then things started to shift, and they shifted so gradually that I didn't notice it happening until it was already done. It started with small things. He rearranged the garage without asking, because he said my organization system was inefficient. I let that go. He started buying groceries and putting them in the pantry in a way that pushed my things to the back. Organic, everything. Brands I'd never heard of, foods I didn't eat. I let that go too. He changed the thermostat settings and got annoyed when I changed them back. I tried to talk to him about it, and he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Come on, we're all just trying to be comfortable." I told my daughter some of this. She nodded and said he was stressed about the job search and didn't mean anything by it. I believed her. Then he found a job. A good one, actually. Regional sales director for a medical supply company based in Dublin, Ohio. I was genuinely happy for him. I thought things would relax. Instead, something changed in him that I can only describe as a loosening of whatever restraint he'd been holding on to, like he'd been on his best behavior while he needed something from me, and now that he was stable again, he didn't see the point anymore. He stopped thanking me for dinner. He started having opinions about how the house should be run. He told me my lawn looked raw and hired a service without asking me, then handed me the bill and said, "I figured you'd want to split it." I was so caught off guard that I paid it. I've regretted that ever since, because it told him something about me that wasn't true. that I was the kind of man who could be led around without noticing. My daughter got pregnant that fall. I was over the moon about it. A grandchild, Barbara would have been beside herself. I threw myself into being useful, set up the nursery in the spare bedroom, baby-proofed the staircase, learned more about infant CPR than most grandparents feel they need to know. When my grandson was born in June, I was at that hospital from the first contraction to the moment the doctor handed him to my daughter. I cried. I'm not ashamed of that. But something else happened when my grandson was born. My son-in-law's behavior toward me underwent another shift. Before the baby, he was rude and dismissive. After the baby, he started treating me like I was staff. Like my purpose in the house was to support their family's needs and otherwise stay out of the way. He'd come home from work and walk past me without speaking. He'd take my grandson from me mid-feeding with no explanation. He started referring to rooms in my house as our living room, our kitchen, like I was a tenant rather than the owner. I said something about it once, directly. I waited until my daughter was napping with the baby and found him in the kitchen, and I said, as calmly as I could, I need you to understand that this is my home, and I'd like to be treated with basic respect while you're living in it. He looked at me for a moment and then said, I hear you, no problem, and went back to whatever he was doing on his phone. Nothing changed. I started keeping notes, not obsessively, just dates and incidents, written in a small notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. My project manager instincts kicking in. Document everything. You never know when you'll need a record. By the following November, they'd been living with me for nearly 20 months. There had been no conversation about when they planned to leave. They'd saved money. I knew that because my son-in-law had mentioned more than once how much he was making at his new job, always in a tone that suggested he was doing me a favor by staying. What he never mentioned was looking for their own place. Never mentioned moving out. As far as I could tell, the temporary arrangement had simply become permanent in his mind, without anyone ever asking me. I tried talking to my daughter about a timeline. She got emotional. Said she wasn't ready to leave because of the baby, because of the help I provided, because it made more financial sense to save another year first. I didn't push. I should have. I didn't, because she cried and she looked so much like her mother. When she cried that I couldn't hold the line, my son-in-law interpreted my silence as surrender. Then came Thanksgiving. I'd hosted Thanksgiving for years. It was my thing. Barbara started it, and when she died, I kept it going. Her stuffing recipe, her sweet potato casserole, the way she'd always set out the good china even though we had to wash it by hand. I made everything myself. It took 2 days. Every year I invited my brother and his wife from Cleveland, my college friend who lives alone in Akron. It was always small, always warm, always mine. That year my son-in-law's family came. His parents, his brother and his brother's girlfriend, a cousin I'd never met. My son-in-law had invited them without asking me. He told me about it 9 days before Thanksgiving, with the energy of someone telling you about a dentist appointment, not of someone asking to fill your home with their relatives. I kept my composure. I said, it would have been nice to be consulted. He shrugged and said, it's Thanksgiving, the more the merrier. My daughter looked at her phone. I cooked anyway. I set the table. I was friendly to his family, who were perfectly pleasant people who had no idea what their son had done or what I was feeling. None of that was their fault. At dinner, my son-in-law sat at the head of my table, my chair. I was seated at the side, near the kitchen door, like a guest in my own home. I told myself it didn't matter. Seating arrangements are not worth a ruined Thanksgiving. I ate, I passed dishes, I made small talk. When his mother complimented the stuffing and asked for the recipe, I gave it to her, and something about that moment. Sharing Barbara's recipe in Barbara's dining room while sitting in the wrong seat landed in my chest like a stone. After dinner, while everyone was watching football, I went up to my bedroom and called my attorney. I'd been thinking about making a call like this for a while. I just hadn't known the right moment. Sitting on the edge of my bed on Thanksgiving night, still in my dress shirt, listening to cheering from the living room below. That was the moment. Her name is Patricia. She's been my attorney for 15 years, and she doesn't waste words. I told her the situation. She asked a few questions. Then she said, "They have no legal right to remain in your home. You're entitled to issue a formal notice of eviction." Ohio law requires 30 days for a family member who has been a resident given the duration of their stay. But I'd recommend 60, just to show good faith and avoid any complications. Good faith. I'd been showing good faith for 20 months. I didn't do anything that night. I sat with it. I wanted to be certain because once you take a step like that with your family, you cannot take it back. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn a river stone over in your hand, looking at it from every angle. I thought about my grandson. I thought about Barbara, what she would say. I thought she would say, "You have been patient long enough. You have been more than patient." The week after Thanksgiving, I met with Patricia in person and signed the paperwork. She advised me to say nothing at home in advance. "Don't tip your hand," she said. "Let the process do the work." What I did instead, because I am a planner and because I'd had 20 months to think about it, was spend those weeks quietly getting my affairs in order. I had a locksmith come while everyone was out and rekey every exterior door. I kept the new keys. I had the keypad code on the garage changed. I transferred my important financial documents from the home office, my files, my records, my will, to my safe deposit box at the bank. Not because I thought they would steal from me, but because I wanted to feel like the house was mine again, at least privately, before it officially became mine again. The eviction notice was served by a process server on a Tuesday afternoon in December. I was in the house when it happened. My son-in-law opened the door, and I watched his face change as he read the document. He came to find me in the kitchen. "What is this?" he said, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, exactly. Something more like disbelief, like he'd genuinely never considered that this could happen. I said, "You have 60 days to find alternative housing. I've been more than fair, and I think, given how long you've been here, you'll agree that 60 days is more than enough time." "You're kicking us out," he said. "I'm reclaiming my home," I said. He called my daughter down from upstairs. I watched him hand her the document. I watched her read it. When she looked up at me, her eyes were wet, and she said, "Dad, how could you do this without warning us?" I said, "I gave you 20 months of warnings. I asked for timelines. I asked to be consulted. I asked to be consulted. I asked to be treated with respect. I don't know what else I could have done." She started to. My son-in-law put his arm around her and gave me a look over her shoulder that I have no interest in describing. What I will say is that it confirmed, without any doubt, that I had made the right decision. The next 60 days were not comfortable. I won't pretend otherwise. The house was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the Ohio winter. My daughter would sometimes speak to me normally, almost like herself. And then remember she was angry and pull away. My son-in-law was careful around me in a way that felt like the early days, before he'd decided I didn't matter, that performative politeness that meant nothing. But he didn't cross any lines. He knew where he stood now. What saved me in those weeks was my grandson. My daughter still let me help with him. I think because she needed the help and had the good sense to recognize it. Even in her anger, I'd come into the nursery in the mornings and he'd see me and light up the way only babies can, with their whole face, their whole body. I'd talk to him and he'd make sounds back, and in those moments the whole mess of it receded, and I was just his grandfather in the morning light. They found an apartment in Hilliard in early January. 2-bedroom, decent school district, close to his office. I know these details because my daughter told me, not because I asked. She was testing me, I think, seeing if I'd feel guilty. I didn't feel guilty. I felt something closer to relief. They moved out on a Saturday in late January. So my son-in-law carried boxes without speaking to me. My daughter hugged me at the door briefly and then walked to the car. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away. My grandson was in his car seat facing backward, and for a moment I could see his little fist pressed against the window. I went inside and stood in my living room. Really stood there, in the quiet. My house smelled like my house again, coffee and the cedar sachets Barbara used to put in the closets, which I still refresh every fall. I walked to the dining room and stood at the head of my table, in my chair, and I just breathed. I called my daughter that evening, she answered. That was more than I'd expected. I told her I loved her and that I hoped she'd let me be part of my grandson's life. She was quiet for a long time and then said, "I need some time, Dad." I said I understood. She called me 3 weeks later on a Sunday morning. We talked for 45 minutes, about nothing, mostly about everything. She said my son-in-law was settling into the apartment, that my grandson was sleeping better, that she'd picked up a new design client. She didn't apologize. Neither did I. We didn't need to, because we're not built that way, neither of us is, and because the thing between us is older and sturdier than any of this. I see my grandson twice a week now. Tuesday mornings and Saturday afternoons. He's pulling himself up on furniture and making sounds that almost sound like real words, and every time I walk in that door he turns toward me like he knows exactly who I am. My house is mine, my table is mine, my chair is mine. Some people, when I tell them this story, say I was too hard, that a father should sacrifice more, that I should have waited them out, kept the peace, put family, and I want to say to those people, I did put family first. I put myself first, because I am family too. I have been in this house for 33 years. I buried my wife from this house. I raised my daughter in this house. I will not apologize for refusing to be a guest in it. Barbara would have agreed with me. She would have waited longer than I did. Probably. She was more patient than me in every way that mattered. But she would have gotten there. And in the end, she would have stood at that table, in that chair, in the home we built together, and she would have said, "This is ours. It always was." I think about her every morning when I come downstairs and make my coffee and sit at the kitchen table by the window, alone in the quiet. It's a good kind of alone, the kind you choose. Where are you listening from today? And I want to know, what would you have done?